Leo, what do you have on your whiteboard today? Kind of curious. You always have something funky over there.
Yeah,
What is that?
this is just some scribbles in mathematical notation. I was just trying to represent how like an event in the system acts on the entire database. But it's just some technical stuff. This is very technical stuff, which we don't want to talk about in this in this
Sure.
meeting.
You always have
Yeah, just some
something
scribbles.
interesting on the whiteboard, something that I don't understand, but
Yeah. No,
always have to.
sometimes it's stuff like this. Sometimes it's more traditional stuff. But yeah, we
Cool.
can get into it one of these days. Maybe if it's relevant.
Yeah, the secret for solving, I guess, the logistics deepest problem.
Yeah, that'd be nice. If it was
That's
that
right.
simple.
Well, guys, welcome to another episode of the Daily Free Caviar podcast. Today we have two very special guests for you. Returning to another episode is Leo Gorodinski, the CTO and co-founder of Alvys, and we welcome for the first time Matt Tabatabai. Did I pronounce that correctly?
You did. That was pretty good.
Yeah? Okay, awesome. The co-founder and COO of Zuum. Thank you both for coming on today's episode. Matt, could you please give us a short intro? We've had Leo a few times, so I want to hear from you, Matt.
Sure, would be happy to. So, as you said, Matt Tabatabai, COO and co-founder of Zuum. So, my story started, I guess, just going back to my education. I graduated Purdue University in electrical engineering, had a few jobs in pretty big organizations like Boeing, Raytheon, so aerospace defense, and then eventually landed my first more logistics-oriented position in a company that was doing international business. It was a $30 billion company. And so I got involved in their digitization initiative and their ERP solution to try to connect the supply chain for their entire operation. And I got involved with a couple of different projects there, and I started feeling the pain points of what shippers go through in trying to bring TMSs and all the other MSs into their ecosystem and streamline their supply chain. Then eventually I met Mo. We've been friends for about 10 years or so, and we started talking about logistics and the pain points back in like 2011, 12. And eventually we incepted Zuum in 2016 with the idea of how do we defragment the space and really bring the shippers, brokers, carriers, all three parties together on one platform. So my perspectives from the shipper side, Mo, my partner, comes from the broker and carrier side, and that's where it all kind of came together.
Sure. Really interesting background, Matt. And then to anyone that doesn't know Leo yet, Leo, if you could just give us a short intro.
Yeah. So I'm the CTO and co-founder at Alvys. My background, as far as education, I majored in math, just pure math, and that's what you see on the board here. I still rely on it quite a bit. But then a big portion of my career I spent in e-commerce. So I was working for an e-commerce startup here in Colorado for a long time, like 8 years. And then I moved to New York to join what would become Jet.com. And I was there for about 8 years. And now I'm back in Denver. I partnered with Nick, who was running his freight brokerage and carrier business. He already started building a TMS for himself because he didn't like anything else that was out there. And my job has been simple since then, is just take what he's built for his own freight brokerage and turn it into a multi-tenant system. And that's what I've been doing for the past couple of years. I've always been on the periphery of logistics, being in e-commerce, but actually being in logistics is a little bit different. With e-commerce, you think about delivery as just this black box, is that you send a request to UPS or like a local delivery service, and then they're going to pick it up and give you tracking information. But now seeing how things actually happen on the inside, it's a very interesting picture, and I'm excited to learn and look at what others have experienced and
Sure.
Just talk freight.
Well, thanks for the intro to both you, Matt, and Leo. One of the reasons why this episode is so exciting is because both Alvys and Zuum are competitors in the TMS freight sector of the industry. Therefore, we're about to listen to two competitors speak, which is exciting. We can learn a lot from each other. I do want to find out, Matt, if you could tell us the story of how you met Mustafa, the CEO, and get into more depth about the story behind Zuum.
Sure, would be happy to. So it wasn't, I think our story was nothing too exciting, but we met through mutual friends, used to just hang out. So we were friends first. So I met Mo back in like 2010, 2011 when I moved out to SoCal, and he had moved around the same time from NorCal to Southern California. And yeah, so we played ball. We used to hang out all the time, talk different business ideas. He was always very ambitious. At the time, he was working at JB Hunt, and so I was doing some things with e-commerce, as well as my brother was doing another business in the beverage industry. So we worked with him on some movements and things like that. He helped me out, and it got me really curious as to what he's doing. I didn't know much about supply chain until a few years later when I started working on what I mentioned earlier, trying to build our TMS system and put something together for our logistics needs, was when I actually started diving into supply chain. But just going into Mo's story, which I think is very relevant to how we started Zuum. He graduated UC Berkeley in supply chain and economics, and landed his first job at JB Hunt. And at JB Hunt, he went through a few different promotions, got involved with JB Hunt 360, their digitization initiative, and felt the pain point of what the industries we think is going on with the industry, which is it's very one directional, right? Brokers typically looking at what can I get to help me digitize my back office, or shippers are looking at procurement tools and certain other tools that can help them solve certain pain points, but there's nobody really looking at all three parties and bringing them together under one platform. We felt that was the true problem in our space. If you have majority of shipments being moved by 20% of shippers or 30% of shippers with high volume that are using convoluted systems that are one directional, then you have brokers that are starting to digitize, but not really that far advanced, and carriers, as you would hear from Leo. Well, they're the furthest behind in terms of tech, starting to adopt. So that's where our premise was. We're just thinking how we solve it. But just going back to Mo's experience of working in a brokerage and then leaving JB Hunt to go to two trucking companies where he had about 60 trucks he was managing, and getting the carrier perspective and seeing the pain points the trucking company had as the COO of the trucking company, figuring out like connecting with all these different brokers to try to find the load, downloading all these apps that are commoditized and like subsidized in some ways, and getting loads and then going and searching for the next load daily, right? Looking for that opportunity for the movement. So his broker carrier experience combined with my shipper experience and some of our other call it leadership is where kind of I would say our background in logistics started.
So Matt, you had this idea together to work to create like a TMS. Can you tell us like the first steps you took? So you get together, like what was the story behind actually like the founding of the company? Were you like hanging out and all of a sudden the idea came up? And then what were like the first initial steps that you took after you had the idea?
Yeah, I think so. The initial idea came, so Mo, had his little notebook with a lot of ideas, and he had the idea that, he was thinking about how do we do what I think Uber and Convoy and everybody's doing, connecting shippers to carriers. But back in 2014, 2015, that's when he was like really ideating different ideas. Then we sat down and started whiteboarding and getting deeper and deeper into what do we need to do. So first thing we did is, because we sat on top of a trucking company and we had 60 trucks, and we could essentially sit in the cab of the truck and go on rides with the truck drivers. That's where we started. We said, look, let's go kind of see what the trucking side looks like first, and really spend time with the driver. What are the driver pain points? What are they using? What are the apps? How are they using their phone? How are they communicating? What are the best channels for them? And we spent some time really doing our user research with the driver first. And then eventually I remember actually sitting in a room with a whiteboard. We did this, call it business model canvassing exercise that took 2 days. And that's when we hit our aha moment of, okay, like, cool, there's this digitization that needs to happen on the brokerage side. But the way we would differentiate ourselves, we felt, was through building collaboration. Like today, we're here with Leo, right? Who, as you stated, is, we're doing some similar things. So even though most companies would look at that, hey, there's two competitors sitting in a room, we see that as I would call it, coopetition or collaboration. In this industry, we need to bring everybody together. So people that are even looked at as maybe having some crossover with us, we can partner with, we can give them tech, we can share, data, we can even share opportunities with each other, because the market's massive. It's a huge, massive market that we all can grow in. There's no scarcity issue here, right? Of like one person's monopolize it. It's going to stay fragmented, and working together, as they would say, 1 + 1 is 3, right? So that's kind of the background on that.
Sure.
I think that this trajectory is very interesting, and it's similar to our story, which we call a bottom-up approach, where you guys had this trucking company and you were thinking, how could we make it more efficient? And then you got in there with the drivers and you were just approaching the problem from that bottom-up perspective, as you're actually trying to run a business, and then you're finding ways to automate it. And the same thing happened at Alvys. Originally, Alvys came around because Nick was trying to make his business more efficient. He already had a business, it was already running, and then he decided to automate it with technology. And so I agree with the fact that we're, on the one hand, we're competitors, but on the other hand, this whole landscape is just forming beneath our feet right now. We don't even really know what are we competing on. I think at a high level, we're saying, well, we're building technology for freight, for trucking companies, maybe more specific to say that we're building technology for carriers. But other than that, what does that technology actually look like? What does that mean? And this has been one of the challenges we've had communicating with the VC community, is that they would say, oh, you guys are building a TMS. That's a very crowded space. And I think on the one hand, it is crowded, but on the other hand, we don't really have a clear definition of what we're talking about. What is a TMS? What does it mean for there to be a TMS for a carrier? And what's currently lacking? And so the way I see it is we're all figuring this out together. And you guys might go into one direction, we might go into another direction based on what our tenants and use cases require. But it seems like there is a shared path here. There is a shared vision. I just don't know if we fully understand what that is quite yet.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, right? I think it's interesting times. As I would say, COVID, or this black swan event, kind of accelerated the need for turning an industry that's so antiquated in a lot of ways. I mean, looking at the tech that has been out there prior to what, companies like yourself and, what we're doing. I hate to give the example, but it looked like Atari. Still, the stuff that companies are still using today, very unitary, surface level solutions. So this is a problem that we've also dealt with as well, as you deal with VCs, venture capital groups, and things like that. There's a bit of educating on why what we're doing, why what your company's doing is different than the 1,001 flavors of TMSs that are out there. TMS is just kind of turned into a bad word almost. Sorry to say it, but so that is a challenge that we have dealt with. Same thing with the concept of digital freight marketplaces or digital freight brokerages have created a little bit of a stigma in the market with VCs, because they've been known to be big money, requiring a lot of capital, right? And a lot of the venture capital groups are now considering that side of the world dead and hard, especially in a market that's flipped, because it required so much capital. It was subsidizing the businesses to try to grow valuation, but at massive losses year over year. And that's what I call DFM fatigue, I'm going to use some bad words on these two different sectors, but that doesn't mean if somebody comes in and builds a solution that's a digital freight brokerage that actually can turn profit, can go towards full automation and not try to win over business by subsidizing and faking it till you make it sort of thing, right? Throwing billions of dollars. Why do those companies suffer when they're bringing new solutions that are going to eventually move to full automation and eliminate the need for so much waste in our space? I think that's the thing that we have to cross that kind of chasm, so to speak, with the VCs on that, and make sure they understand that the world's changing. That was 1.0 of DFMs. That was 0.1 of TMSs, and there's a new wave coming in that's going to really change the industry for the good.
So I wonder what you think about this, right? One of the things I was confused about when I was entering this industry is I'm thinking, okay, looking at all the incumbents in the space, like there have been players in the space building technology for a long time. For example, Oracle, they have like the supply chain technology arm. They do something around that, but more modern tech like Uber Freight. I thought, why are we even trying to do this when Uber Freight is looking at this problem? Like, what chance do we have to compete against a large player like Uber Freight? And when I dug into it a little bit deeper, I understood that Uber Freight, they're not necessarily building technology for carriers. They're more like a freight brokerage. But the question remains in my mind is that why is it that there are major technology players out there that haven't solved these problems? Like I remember back in like 2005, I was reading this article about UPS, where UPS was claiming, we're not a delivery company, we're a technology company. And they were talking about how they created this efficient routing system where drivers rely on right-hand turns a lot more, save them a lot of miles. So that was already things that people are thinking about back in 2005. So why couldn't a company like UPS or more recently Uber just come in and totally dominate the space? What is it that prevents them from building a carrier TMS?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think there's, if you look at these companies, like you talked about UPS, or if you look at even Uber Freight and their mandate and the way they looked at growing and scaling the business. So in each case, they came up with some sort of a plan to take a market. Generally, their metrics are there, right? Figuring out the fastest way that they can get their LTV over CAC and all these metrics so they can go to the VC and get more money, or in the case of Uber, it already had deep pockets and could fund a lot of that stuff. But essentially, our industry is so massive, right? There's so many different players, so many different systems, that anybody that comes in, Silicon Valley tells you solve one problem, right? That's the tech world's MO, is like, hey, go solve one problem. Corporations, they look at what is the problem I need to solve today that's going to give me the most ROI. And they're not necessarily that good at building technology. That's been kind of proven over and over again. Companies that they're traditional companies that come in and bring a tech arm typically have in my opinion, and this is a kind of controversial opinion, it takes them a little bit longer because they're not agile. They're big organizations. They got a lot of red tape. The money, funding, process, everything has so many steps they have to follow that they can't be like startup companies, which are much more agile and can tackle things and build solutions and ideate and think outside the box and even make mistakes, right? We're allowed to make mistakes, because if we do make a couple of mistakes, we might go out of business, but it's not a big loss. Versus big organizations, it's a harder mission for them. So they pick their battles wisely, somewhat wisely, and look for things that they can actually address. And some of these things are just huge, I think, undertaking for them to want to invest. At some point, somebody high enough says, I don't want to spend that money right now. Focus on.
Yeah, it seems like it's a risk, and it seems like they would have to take this bottom up approach, right? It's going to be difficult for a company like Uber to come in top down and say, okay, we're building a carrier TMS, and then how are they going to actually build it without working directly with a carrier? and the carrier market is so fragmented. And I could see that being a daunting problem for them. Whereas we're coming at it from a very different direction. We're just saying, hey, we have a carrier where we're operating. Let's try to automate this carrier, and then we go from there. And I think this approach is advantageous for us, because that's doesn't seem like something a big company can do, because they're not agile, because they don't necessarily have access to the users like we would, and it requires this sort of entrepreneurial push from the bottom up to create technology as opposed to top down.
Yep, makes sense. Absolutely.
I got a quick question for you, Matt, just because I'm really fascinated by the journeys of companies. I like listening to podcasts about hearing more about the story. And you got this aha moment, and then what did you do with the aha moment? Did you bootstrap while creating the first version of Zuum, or did you go and raise money first?
So we bootstrapped. We did what most early startups do, which is you bootstrap and you go to friends, family, and fools, right, to get the investment. We had some friends that invested in us, so that helped out to seed fund the company. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we sat on top of a trucking company. That trucking company gave us the office space and give us some initial seed funding as well, and give us the assets, the trucks that we needed to be able to start the business. And eventually, as we started getting more and more traction, and I would consider our phase one, where we built our digital freight marketplace, we got to revenue pretty quick, and so it started showing good traction. And that at that point we started going to a lot of corporate ventures that actually came in the next stage of our funding. So we were not traditional in that we didn't go to your typical VC early. We took our time with corporate ventures, people that came in and bought our software or our services and invested in Zuum, and grew that way for much longer before we actually started bringing VCs or big banks into it.
Sure. And what is the difference between a corporate venture and a VC?
So I'm more talking about, like, for example, we did business with a company, let's say BNSF Logistics or Holman
Sure.
Growth Ventures, that we're doing the business with them as a customer, and their venture arm or the company itself as a corporation invested in Zuum because they saw a validation of a POC.
Sure.
And to me, that's very valuable because it says, these companies see value in what we're producing. So they're investing in us to get not only a piece of Zuum and help it grow, but also be able to get the technology they need for their internal needs.
Very interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Matt.
Leo, I'm curious, how do you actually describe your company to a VC, like in a few short sentences? What do you guys say?
I think, for us, and that comes up a lot, like, what's your 60-second pitch or whatever. Once you get to a certain point in your growth, I remember early on, we had to go on stage and give our 60-second pitch or whatever, go to plug and play, do our presentation, things like that. At this stage in our company, most VCs or groups we talk to, they're interested in us, right? They seek us out. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is I feel that once you get to a certain stage and you have value, right, then at that point you can come in and give whatever pitch you want, right? As long as you tell the story, because the news is already out there. So for us,
Sure.
Our mission has always been to help move anything, anytime, anywhere. So we're bringing shippers, brokers, carriers on one unified logistics super platform that ultimately gets everybody to speak one language. That's our long-term vision, what we're trying to do. And we're doing that in 3 phases, essentially, is what we go out and pitch to investors, is that, we've already done phase 1. We need to build our digital freight marketplace to connect shippers to carriers, to get the network effect there. And, accidentally, though that wasn't where we wanted to be in the long term, that scaled out to significant traction, and scaling up even more. So we're breaking some good, what I call in terms of numbers on that side. So then phase 2, when we started actually SaaSing out our software to brokers, carriers, shippers, we had good what I would consider pool of customers already available, because we built the DFM, because the DFM has a lot of shippers and the DFM also has a lot of carriers. So that customer acquisition cost comes down.
What is a DFM?
Digital freight marketplace, or digital freight, brokerage, if you want to call it that, is where we started. That was our phase 1. We incubated our software in phase 1. Then in phase 2, which was recently launched like a year ago, we started taking what we incubated and built for ourselves and selling it as a software as a service. And I call it a marketplace SaaS because it's a full end-to-end platform. That's where we've been the last year and getting pretty good traction. As I was trying to explain, basically what I'm trying to say is that because we did phase 1, phase 2 is much, what I would call it, it requires less capital, because we already have a lot of shippers, we have a lot of carriers. It helps us become more sticky with shippers with the technology we provide. So we're not just going after freight, which is, it's all about, when you're competing on freight, it's all about cost and service, right? So it's a race to provide the cheapest freight for the best service. Whereas if you're providing technology and you're really helping your customer get control of their supply chain, the freight is just, I consider the lifeblood of the system.
Sure. And I want to build on that real quick, Leo. Sorry. Just because I'm actually currently in talks of like creating some kind of technology that would be sold to warehouses. I was wondering what is your sales approach in getting set up with shippers and warehouses? Have you realized or noticed anything unique that works with them?
So I think with shippers, the thing that I would say in my experience has worked getting in the door with shippers with us, because, essentially we come in with, I would consider a solutions back, right? We come in as a solutions provider. So going in, really understanding what is it that they need today. So if they need technology, some of them do, some of them don't. They might be in the middle of a cycle, so the refresh is not going to happen for them to look for new tech. Well, we can come in and provide them support on their freight side and do that. So we have that optionality to build relationships. So we can do the crawl, walk, run of like getting in, moving freight, showing them that we do better than others. We can provide the high level of service. And then eventually, as that time comes for them to look at new technology, we've already built relationships, if that makes sense.
So you're also a freight brokerage? Sorry if I missed that part.
Digital. Essentially, that's where we started out. Is a digital.
Oh, got it. Okay, got it. Sorry, I didn't realize that. I thought you were selling just like the TMS software, like for shippers. I didn't realize that you're actually also selling. You also have the freight brokerage arm.
Yeah, and that essentially the brokerage arm started out as our incubation of our software. And then eventually, as we start scaling out, that grew. It's something that, in the long term is not necessarily a part of Zoom's mission, but it is something that we started with. So we're in phase 2 where we're selling software. That's our technology is our differentiator ultimately.
Sure.
So that was my question, actually. So this phase 1, it was a digital freight marketplace, this DFM.
Yep.
Is that right? And so what does that actually look like? What does a freight marketplace look like? Is it a place where a shipper can go and post their loads they want to get shipped, or a broker can go and post loads they need to get shipped? And then similarly, carriers and brokers can go on there to find loads. Is that basically what the freight marketplace is?
Pretty much. So it's essentially, first it was more like a digital freight brokerage before we had all the infrastructure for connecting everybody together. So first is, hey, we're connecting shipper to carrier and we're automating the back office, just like some of the other players out there. That's step 1, right? So you have to get that going. And then in our next phase, we did build technology to give to the shipper to be able to work with the broker, to be able to work with the carrier. And that could be, just all inclusive in that package, or there's some other parties that can be connected into that, which is what we did. So everybody benefits from that network. So you can push into different marketplaces and work with each other if you choose to, right? If that makes sense. So it's bringing that network effect for everybody to be able to help each other out in some ways.
Got it. Yeah, and this back office stuff. I think I understand what you mean by that. But like to me, this marketplace, this freight brokerage, just the act of posting loads and looking for loads, that could be a very simple, or it could be very complicated. It could be as simple as you post a phone number and then you got to call that shipper or customer to see if that load is still available. And that's how a lot of these load boards operate right now, like DAT. A trucking company, a dispatcher sits all day on DAT. They look for loads that are kind of interesting to them, then they call them, right? But it seems like that's part one. Part two would be, well, why do you need to call them? Why can't you just press book and send them that information automatically? Maybe at first via email, but then a deeper sort of integration. Is that what you mean by this back office stuff?
Yeah, exactly. So what we did when we did our back office automation systems, we essentially, exactly like you said, we saw the pain point in a lot of the, call it traditional legacy solutions, were a lot of that, where it's like, okay, go look through phone numbers, still a lot of, phone calls, emails, Excel sheets, which is, it's cumbersome. There's way too many steps. In fact, we did a case study. I remember it was like a movement from one place to another for a big company. And it was like 360 touch points, 5 different people involved. And it took all these man hours to do, and had a lot of room for error because of it. So what we did is we looked at we believe in the RoboCop model, which is you can't completely eliminate, the human being. You need to empower that human intuition and that person in that seat to be able to do more versus, hey, we're just eliminating that seat. So everything we built helped supercharge, like basically turn each operator into a super operator. And the data is there to support that. How we did that is, like you said, you look at automating the right things. So if the way you freight match, the way you give the ability for all 3 parties to be digitized, to work with each other, to be able to like almost like an eBay system, bid, accept loads, tender out loads, do all the document management, call it any sort of accounting, billing, tracking, dispatching, making tracking agnostic. So regardless of what system they're using, whatever it is, it's integrated in there. So you have more optionality to know where the truck is. And if they're not using any of the Project 44s, 4 kites, macro points, or we have our own as well, then you can always use what we call analog, dead data, and turn into digital data by having somebody that does give the call in to the driver, or be able to text message all that stuff through the system. So we even have text messaging built in, where it's like you can text message the driver, text message the dispatcher, so you're not annoying them with calls. So there's a lot there, accessorials, automated, a lot of tools for pricing. That's very important in our space. If you're looking at it from each lens, whether you're a broker or a shipper, for a broker, knowing how you're pricing things based on your pricing engine to increase your win rate and still maintain margins, really important with the fluctuation that's happening in the market. So there's data points out there, without naming them, that give you good intel is what's going on in the market, but they're not live today. So how do you give them something as dynamic to make them comfortable with being able to give accurate pricing hour by hour? That's the future, right? And we're moving in that direction with the technology we've built. How do you simplify pricing on RFPs and make sure you can turn that around in a way that supports your business? Workforce management is a big deal. If you look at the brokerage world, it's typical brokerage you walk into, it's like a boiler room with 100 people that are just sitting there banging the phones, calling out, and maybe doing 4, 5, 6 nowadays industry wide, like 7 loads a day. How do you bring in the right systems to manage the workforce to get as much output from them as you can? So we have like a war room technology setup where there's timers on everything. Assignments are made automatically if needed without the manager's input. We have gamification built into it. So rewards, mostly rewards, and some punishments, right? If people want to level up and grow and get the status they're looking for, get recognition, get rewards, get commissions, things like that. All of that's gamified in our system. There's a lot of depth. So I think what differentiates us, for those that have seen what we've done, is the depth of our technology. It's not only very easy to use and clean, user friendly, so to speak, but it's also very deep. It's not surface level. It gives you all the A to Z you need to run your business.
I like that model, like you guys call it, the RoboCop model, where you're just empowering people that are already doing the work. You're not trying to like replace them or fully automate them away. And that's our approach as well. The way I see it is that people were moving freight long before computers or the internet were around. And I think there's just too much to automate there. On the one hand, it seems simple, right? You're just moving some items from point A to point B. Like, why is all this human intervention required? But I think the other reality is that all these things are so complex, and tying them together is so complicated that we actually don't have the technology or the ability to build the technology to automate everything right away. So we have to chip away at it little by little. But I also bring this up when we talk to our users, and we talk to our users all the time to build new features. Sometimes they get a little scared, saying, well, what's my job going to be if the system is going to do that right now? And the point is that we're not trying to eliminate their job. We're just trying to make them a lot more effective at what they're already doing. And I don't see an end in sight to actually eliminating people from certain decision-making roles. And I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
100%. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and I think that's the misconception with people that don't know our space, that come into it trying to, build solutions. For those of us who've been in it long enough and kind of see the complexity of the business and the need for that human touch, it's not going to go away, like you said, for some time.
Yeah.
And
even with like the self-driving trucks.
Yeah.
Some people might think, oh, well, self-driving trucks, this is an end to the industry, right? but not quite. I mean, even like from our system perspective, the way I think about it is that we could have a truck that's self-driving or non-self-driving. It doesn't really matter to us, but we still need a dispatcher. We still need all those things around it.
Sure.
Absolutely.
To change topic a little bit, Matt, I'm just curious, because I was telling you earlier about the idea I have to selling to shippers software, and it'd be more of like an appointment scheduler. And I know there's appointment schedulers out there, but I'm wondering if maybe I could hear from both of you kind of insights on, do you think this is some kind of software that's needed right now? There's definitely some competition when it comes to appointment scheduling, because I've seen a few platforms, but none of them seem to be successful in terms of getting shippers to utilize it. And when you go on like Kroger's website to schedule an appointment, it's actually pretty funny. There's like, you have to send an email to like inbound at Kroger appointments with like 10 different points listed, where it's like bill of lading number, must deliver by date, like all types of like really like tedious information that you got to type in and send an email to. And it's like there has to be a solution to warehouse like scheduling appointments. So I'm wondering if you maybe have any insights on that. That's something that I've been in talks with some people to create.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I've seen some activity in this area. In fact, without naming the companies, there's one actually based in Chicago.
Yeah.
And
that was acquired, right?
Yeah. And some other folks that I've seen, for whatever reason, my impression, and I think I'd be happy to sit down if you want to brainstorm, and I'm sure Leo would be happy to help out as well. I think it'd be good to kind of see the competitive landscape a little bit better. first and see how they're targeting the market. But for whatever reason, I haven't seen this really take off with anyone really winning this race.
Sure.
From Zoom's perspective, we did some things around appointments just from a broker side. If you want to just kind of helping the broker be able to manage appointments. So we did build something within our platform to help from a people side. Hey, these appointments need to be scheduled. Here's like all the information. It's just more of a appointment management system. So that's the depth of what we have to this point. And there's players that are trying to build this stuff. So my answer is I think you need to basically do a deeper analysis of the market, really understand the competition. There's a reason why they've struggled. I just don't know what it is. Maybe they didn't have the right solution, or maybe it's harder to get capital for it. I don't know.
Sure.
The same thing on the Alvys side is that I don't really know what this appointment situation looks like from the shipper perspective. But on the Alvys side, for example, for the freight brokers, we also have the same thing, is we have the ability to say that, well, this pickup or this drop off, it has an appointment. And so you have to schedule around that. And where that really comes in is part of the workflow for the broker. So a lot of the brokerages we work with, they have this department that's called tracking or visibility. And that department, what they do is they make sure that all the loads they have en route are going to get delivered on time, to make sure if there's an appointment involved, they want to make sure they make that appointment. So they communicate with the driver, and there's a lot of manual steps. They might text the driver a few hours before the drop off, especially if there's an appointment, especially if they happen to know that this facility is very strict with appointments. Although none of that is really automated. I think we just have notes in the system that say, hey, this facility is very strict with appointments, but we don't have like a facility manager, appointment manager, anything like that. The only thing we do have is this ability for users to specify that this load has a specific appointment, number one, and then there's like check-in and check-out times. And then the other thing that we do to help the tracking team is if, for example, the shipper required the carrier, the driver, to use visibility application like MacroPoint or Forkites, then we bring that data into Alvys so that the user, the tracking team, can see, oh, okay, it looks like based on MacroPoint, this driver is still a ways out. And maybe that's a signal to the tracking team to communicate with the driver, communicate with the facility, and so on and so forth. But other than that, it seems like there's a lot more work to be done here. And I haven't thought about this problem from the shipper perspective at all.
Totally. Yeah. There's a lot of problems, especially for just brokerages. They spend so much time calling shippers to schedule appointments or emailing them and waiting for replies instead of just automatically booking it online. And some warehouses like Anheuser-Busch, they have a system where you log in and you set up an appointment up, but it's still for the most part just really tedious and time consuming. So
yeah, it seems like it's another form of capacity, just like we're looking at truck capacity. Is there a lot or little truck capacity in a certain area? It seems like being able to schedule an appointment, there's also a capacity there, right? There's only so much that a facility can schedule, right? Yeah. And so much that they can receive. So it seems like somebody that can create an appointment first will win. They'll get their stuff there sooner. And I think when things get even more efficient than they are now, that will be another battle. People fighting for the right appointment slot and trying to make it there on time.
I think that one of the reasons that hasn't been so successful is, for one, the company that acquired the company that we spoke about. I'm not sure if we should mention names or not. Do you mind, Matt, if we mention names, or should we?
It's up to you. Yeah, if you want to go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're talking about OpenDoc that got acquired. Is that yeah? So, I think one of the reasons they're not as successful is because they got acquired by a broker, essentially, that other brokers won't want to use that platform because it's owned by their competitor. That's kind of like my thought process behind it. I might be wrong, since a shipper might require a broker to use it. But yeah, I think the shippers definitely have a lot of a need for technology innovation to connect better with brokers. And it could lead to different API configurations where if you put the warehouse into whatever TMS you're using, it automatically chooses an appointment time without having to call anyone. It just schedules it. So that's like, I feel like the future, and someone's going to have to create that solution. That's just my mind, because in my mindset, because I've seen it. I've been, a freight broker for so many years. I ran 100 people, or I was managing 100 people in Ukraine, and I was overseeing every department, and I saw how time consuming account managers, how time consuming it was for them to schedule appointments and to reschedule appointments. So sorry for kind of going off topic, but just something on my mind, and wanted to pick both of your brains on that.
Makes sense. And I think as long as you're building something, it goes back to what I said at the beginning about what Zoom's all about. If there's a way that we bring all the right systems together for these three parties and eventually all parties to be able to work together, shippers, brokers, carriers, that's the future. Essentially right now, everybody's just kind of one directional. Shipper cares about procurement, has some systems that are connecting to each other with some disparate systems as well, where they have data issues and running and controlling their supply chain. Brokers are further behind than most big shippers, and carriers are the furthest behind. I think there's some stat I saw from Gartner that was a year old, where it was only about 30% of carriers, or somewhere around there, that were using some form of digital solution system, and brokers were at like 40-something%, and shippers were supposedly at 60%. So there's 40% they're still using phone calls, emails, and Excel sheets, which is really crazy.
I heard of a guy from Georgia who's a freight broker. He has the same book of business for like the last 10 or 20 years. Uses just a pen and paper Excel sheet, and makes a lot of money because he has the same customers and he uses the same carriers. And he doesn't see the need to grow anymore because he makes a lot, and he's comfortable in a position where he doesn't need to take on any TMS or software for that matter. So it's definitely in the industry where a lot of people are still using Excel sheets, and people that could afford TMSs don't use it because they're just old school like that.
Yeah, I think it's old school. I think the other factor here is that it takes a lot for a TMS to prove its value, and for it to actually be worth it entering data into the TMS. And that's, in a sense, one of the problems we're trying to solve, is that for somebody in logistics to start using a piece of software, it better be really, really good. It better be worth it. Because if it's just another tool where they have to record data, but it doesn't give them any value, there's going to be reluctance to do that. So there's this barrier to entry to building these kinds of products, these features, is that it has to be pretty darn good to be worth it. And I think that's part of the other challenge. It's not that easy to build something that's good.
Sure, that's the most difficult part, probably. And I'm curious, Matt, how big is your team over at Zoom?
So we're over 100, just a little over 100 people. Okay.
And that's all US based?
No, we have about 60, I think 68, 67 US based, and then offshore. The rest are offshore.
Got it. Do you mind telling us where? I'm curious. I could cut this out later if you don't want it to be.
I mean, so we have teams in Ukraine and Romania. We also have teams in the Philippines as well.
Got it. Okay. So close to Alvys, because Alvys is a team in Moldova,
yeah.
Moldova.
Yeah, pretty close. Yeah, our teams have been there, especially one of the teams has been there from day one. So we've been, fortunate to have them, that continuity. Very, very good team that came from a big company before. They worked with IBM before. And yeah, it's been great.
Sure. Matt, can you tell us any funny stories from the journey? Anything that comes to mind?
Funny stories. We have a lot of funny stories. I'm trying to think of one that sticks out. I think just memory wise, one of the things that just popped in my head was because you said you're right now in Europe and in Poland. We were actually flying through Poland. So we went to Germany. So Mo and I, Mustafa and I, went to a plug and play event, and also went to visit one of our investors, and now soon, hopefully soon after 4 years, will be a software customer as well in Spain. In that travel and that trip, so we did Spain, then we went to I think it's Hamburg, and then as we left, we're flying into Poland, and stopped there at the airport and flew back to, actually went to Iceland, which was a beautiful trip I'll talk about later. But long story short, I got super sick and had like a massive headache in the airport in Poland. And I just remember, I got so sick that they had like three nurses come out from the airport, and I almost passed out. This is how much traveling we were doing back then. So not a funny story, but Mo has all these pictures that he uses against me when he wants to, because I look like I was dying, and I had, IV put in me and all this stuff. So, yeah.
Did they take care of you properly?
They did.
Sure.
They did.
Yeah.
They got me back to life. I felt better.
Nice.
But if you ever see Mo, just get him to show you those pictures. Very
Sounds good. It's interesting because in the first episode of podcast with Leo mentioned a story when he was in Moscow. He was part of the jet.com team. He was the first engineer at jet.com, and he was traveling the world, and he was overlooking like the Moscow sunset, and you weren't happy at that moment, and you were wondering why you're not happy, and it's because you didn't have a job. And then he went to build Alvys, and that's like the story behind that. But all these stories from Europe's definitely a cool place to be in. Well, guys, Leo, do you have anything else you'd like to ask Matt, or Matt, do you have anything else to say?
Well, I mean, I have plenty of things to ask. I just want to know how much time we have, because I think we can go on and on. I mean, I had questions around, for example, just around how you go about building the product and the technology. How do you work with the engineers? Like, how do you get access to drivers, the subject matter experts, and what are some of the challenges that you're seeing in this whole process? So that's one thing I wanted to talk about.
Plus all your secrets, Matt.
Yeah, the secrets, and then the other thing we kind of touched on that earlier is this terminology that we use in this industry. One word that's been popular is collaboration, and initially I was really confused by what does that really mean? What does collaboration mean? And we have a lot of technology out there that says like we facilitate collaboration. We're a collaboration platform, and I wanted to get a sense of what do you think is collaboration in the context of freight? What does that actually mean?
Yeah, I think if you look at the freight industry, let's just take one example that makes it really easy to understand. We have a lot of empty miles, right? 25% empty miles costing billions and billions of dollars. And if we were, and this is not a new concept, right? A lot of people have talked about how do we bring the industry together. So there's a lot of shippers that could be sharing lanes with each other, RFPs with each other, and finding the ability to match that freight together and have continuous moves and reducing that empty miles. So that's collaboration. Brokers have been there for forever, right? 50, 80 years. And this idea of disrupting brokers and eliminating brokers, I think is wrong, right? Brokers are going to be here for some time, and they bring a value. There's a reason why they're there. Yes, the market fluctuates up and down, and a lot of shippers want to try to go direct to carriers if they can when the market's right, and then they use brokers when the time is of the essence and they need the brokers. But essentially, there's 17,000, 18,000 brokers. There's no reason why brokers can't work with each other as well to help bring this ecosystem together. There's no reason why, if they're getting access to thousands of shipments and they're only getting 1% of it covered, they can find a way to get to a broader network to work with other groups to try to maybe find a way to get all that movement happening. So to me, collaboration is the secret sauce in breaking down the walls in our space to eventually solve this problem of fragmentation in supply chain. And hopefully by doing so, next time there's a pandemic or something like that, a black swan event, we're able to preempt it much better, because it's an end-to-end system. It's one language. We know where everything is going and coming, and there's ways to mitigate that risk. But again, I use the word coopetition. Right now it's coopetition. In the future is collaboration, because still the guards are up. Companies are looking at each other as like, well, are you trying to steal my data? What are you trying to do? And that to me comes from a place of scarcity, because at the end of the day, everybody could rise up together. It's a $1.2 trillion market, right? It's a huge market and growing. Why not? We all elevate together.
Yeah,
Sure. It reminds me of the book I read, From Zero to One with Peter Thiel, and he kind of stresses that, where you want to be collaborators, and if you're in a competitive market, you're just barely making enough to keep the lights on. Whereas if you could collaborate, you could develop a product that differentiates itself enough to where you could charge enough for it. And it just reminded me a little bit of that. That's right.
Well, and my learning experience was that it actually collaboration in the sense of logistics, collaboration among the actors that are moving freight, right? One of the things I didn't really know and didn't understand is that it takes a lot of people to move a single load. Like if you look at a load in Alvys, you could see all the people interacting with it. There's the dispatcher, the driver, like the tracking team, if it's a freight brokerage. There might be fleet manager, facilities manager that looks at a load, says, hey, this truck is running late because it hasn't been repaired. So many people have to interact. Usually there's the day shift, the night shift. And a lot of what we're doing is we're providing a platform for all these people to collaborate. And it's simple things like text messaging, sending any sort of communication from the load. A lot of time is spent by people collecting communication that pertain to a specific load. They're going to look in their emails, their text messages, all these other places. And that's collaboration. And I guess my learning experience was, again, that it takes a lot of people to move a load. It might seem very simple, but when you look at all the things that have to happen, setting appointments, right? That's also another form of collaboration. And there's plenty of room left to automate. We're just scratching the surface.
Absolutely. Makes sense. I think so. There was another question as well. I'm just making sure. I think there's a question about our product, kind of like how we look at our product development process.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to answer. So the way we look at our product development, essentially, I mean, we have I think at the core, like you need to have. So if you look at Google ideation theory and some of the other systems that are out there, like, trying to move towards more agile development versus waterfall, being new age, but bringing the right technology. It starts with that leadership. Our leadership on our technology side, where we have a really strong, I believe, CTO that's got 30, 40 years of experience. It's been in some of the best companies across the US, as well as a strong head of product that's done the same. So the two of them coming together with our offshore team and really engaging, having the right building blocks where product marketing has evolved. We have our UI UX research team. We're going in and getting feedback from, first, when we did our brokerage, digital freight brokerage, we used that as kind of our incubation, right? So we got a lot of data from there to see what's going on, learning from our internal behaviors. Then we started doing that with our customer base, where we have a really good feedback loop and understanding what are their pain points, what's working, what's not working, what's the customer experience with the software, how easy is it to use, is it a must-have internally for them, trying to get it to a place where if your folks, that the customer base that are using it, majority believe, 40+% believe that's a must-have within the organization, then you have something that's sticky, that's going to grow. So we've done all these things step by step, incrementally over the years. First, building out our carrier side, then building out the middle piece of our software, then building our shipper side where we interface with shippers, and each time we've done a soft launch, handed it off to customers, gotten a good feedback loop, really built that improvement system into our product to really be tailored for what solves a customer pain point. Because the one thing I've learned is that if you build something and try to, fit it into what a customer needs, may not work. If, you understand the customer, their pain points, and you have a solution that solves their needs today, then it will work, because they're not going to change their problems to fit your solution, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that requires a lot of, I think, a lot of different groups being in sync, running a good process, and just being very diligent with that to make sure you don't just rush into building something and putting it into the market. You do it right. You build your MVP, you take your market, you do your soft launch, get your 10, 15 customers and fit to their needs, really understanding what the broader market's going to need from that.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I learned is that the challenges for the product team in this industry are immense, at least compared to coming from e-commerce. I remember getting into e-commerce, like when I was working at that startup in Boulder, Colorado. It was a small company. We didn't really have project managers or product managers. We had like 3 engineers. And so the early part of my career, I've never even worked with a project manager or product owner or anything like that. And then when I came to Jet, we had a much larger team. We had product managers and owners and stuff like that. And I was really annoyed by them. I was like, leave me alone. Let me just do my work. Like, I don't want to talk to you. Like, I don't want to listen to what you have to say. You're just slowing me down. And I think that when you're building simple things, that works, right? Like, not that an e-commerce platform is simple, but a shopping cart is a shopping cart, right? You don't really need like a product owner to analyze it for you. I think anybody can figure it out. But one of the things we're finding in our industry, especially when we try to improve things beyond the basics, I see that there's such immense pressure on the product owner to be able to understand what's going on, understand the customers, understand all the different use cases, and then be able to write it down, formulate it in a way that everybody understands, and really set the vision. I'm seeing a lot of pressure on this team, especially as we try to take these things to the next level. And I think that the industry is also ripe to bring in talent from other industries. It seems like the young talent has been taken away by companies like Facebook and Google so that they can work on like some sort of a social media application. But this whole industry that actually moves physical objects throughout the country, it's been overlooked. And I'm sort of waiting for the tide to turn, so to say, and for this industry to become really hot. Like, crypto is really hot right now, but like in some sense, and I don't want to disappoint any crypto people, but in my view, the problem of moving money electronically is a solved problem. Like, you can make it more fancy by making it like verifiable and all that stuff, but the movement of physical goods around the country, it's not a solved problem, and there's a lot of challenges there. And I'm wondering whether we'll see a shift in the coming years to where people are going to get more excited about supply chain, and people are going to be going to school and getting excited to build this sort of technology, because there's a lot of work to be done here.
Couldn't agree more.
Definitely an overlooked industry for many years, and now it's the center of attention after the pandemic. And I think we're at a point right now where people are getting excited about it. At least, like, I mean, I studied psychology. I was going to go do my master's, and then my buddy's dad owned a freight brokerage, and he was like, "Paul, do you want to get a job?" And I just jumped on an idea. I thought I might work there for a year and then go do my master's, and I ended up loving the industry and all facets of it. So for me, I think it's definitely an industry that's people are starting to really get excited about, and I think we'll see more of that. To your point, Leo.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. I think it is starting to move in the direction where it's the prime. It's one of the last frontiers to really get the attention it needed. And you're kind of seeing it in the capital markets, even though, a lot of capital markets are especially in the later Series B on, slowing down significantly. There's still pretty good movement in the logistics space. It has slowed down, but I don't think it's just a sign that I think the space is hot, right? It's hotter than it used to be, at least.
Freight waves just released an article saying that M&A and transportation is still hot. Like it came out today. So yeah, sorry to interrupt.
No, I totally agree. So hopefully it stays that way for a while. And as Leo was mentioning, and as you were saying, I think our industry needs it badly. It is time for it to be front and center, and it gets the attention it deserves. Because, I mean, like you said, crypto was a good example. I really like that example. That what we do is so much more important. So hopefully that continues, the attention on the space continues.
Yeah,
Totally. Cool. Leo, anything else you'd like to ask?
well, again, I think that we had a pretty good hour so far. I'm sure we can get into more stuff and more detail, and there's a lot to talk about in this space.
So do you want to continue another time, Leo, or do you want to ask now?
Well, I guess I'm trying to think if anything comes up to mind right now. I had something on my mind. I think I just lost it though.
Maybe Matt has some questions for us.
Maybe, yeah.
Matt, you have any questions for us?
I mean, I think the main thing is I'm obviously curious to hear more from you on what you're planning to build. With your new, it sounds like you're building a new startup. So I always enjoy that, kind of like being in just a passion of mine is being able to help out. So if there's anything I could do to help out there as you're building out your new business idea, I'd be happy to help. So that's just
Appreciate that.
And then on the other side, like with Leo and I know Mustafa and your partner have had some dialogue. Of course, I think even though we do have areas where we have a lot of commonalities in what we built, I'm sure there's ways we could partner together and help each other grow. So just want to extend that out there, as well as we're here on this podcast. It would be good to be meeting outside the podcast and just thinking solutions together. And one thing I'll mention is we started this thing where we call it, it's kind of like I don't know if you guys have heard of like Jeffersonian dinners, where you bring in thought leaders. It started with Thomas Jefferson, the way he organized his meetings to try to solve problems, where they sat on a table like the one I'm sitting on here, you can't see, and kept it to a group of 8, 10, 12 people and try to solve problems together. So we started this initiative where we brought in people from the industry, leaders from the industry, whether they're C-levels of the Fortune 50, which we were lucky enough to get some of those guys on the call, some of the leaders in logistics, some of our partners, some of our even competitors. We started doing these Jeffersonian dinners, and it became very productive because in each of these meetings, we sat down and really looked at how do we solve these particular problems. And even though you're not going to solve it in a few meetings, what happened is behind the scenes, everybody started talking, and it started making that connection where, unbeknownst to me till later, that all these guys were actually starting to connect with each other. And some of the ideas that we had were starting to form, even without a true mandate being fully put on paper. So my point is, we have initiatives around that, and we want to continue that. Maybe in the next Jeffersonian dinner we have you guys join us for that. That'd be
great. That'd be great.
Yeah,
that'd be great. But I mean, yeah, we have as we move forward, we have a lot of different challenges. Like on the product side, we tend to get pulled into different parts of the supply chain. Like for example, the warehouse management piece. We have, for example, shippers using our TMS to ship out their orders, but then they're saying, well, can you guys keep track of our inventory as well? Can you make sure to know what do we have in each warehouse? But on the other hand, this is kind of outside of the scope of our system, so we have to pick our battles and make sure things make sense, and kind of cut them off where there's another technology that's available. We're not going to be building a better warehouse management system that like some of the stuff out there. And so we have to find the right opportunity to integrate. But then at the same time, integration costs can be so high that sometimes it's easier to just build it yourself. And this creates a challenge for us to collaborate. To some extent, it's a technical challenge, and I think the industry will need some standardization before we can collaborate on a higher scale, because right now each integration is like a unique thing. It's like we integrate with Samsara and they speak their own language. We integrate with all these other players, they speak their own language. And so there's a lot of translation that has to happen on the back end. And so I wonder, I think one of the ways that we can collaborate in the future is to standardize these things. Standardize, what does a load look like? What are all the different statuses? How does it move forward? And how does collaboration take place? And I think it's too early for that to start to happen, but I think those are the things that will help standardize and make it more efficient overall. The other problem we have with the product, the challenge is, and I think everyone is having it in the industry, is onboarding the smaller carriers. Is if it's an owner operator, if it's just one person, maybe a guy owns a truck and his wife is helping him dispatch or something like that. We haven't figured out that problem. How do we reach those people digitally? We can't get on a phone call with each of them to show them a demo of the software. We have to be able to reach them in a digital way. But then once they get into the system, they have to be able to start onboarding on their own. They have to kind of self-service onboarding. And how do you do it in a way that doesn't overwhelm them? How do you get them to a quick win? How do you get them to see the value? And for a larger brokerage that has a carrier business, they have a staff, they have an owner that comes in and says, okay, guys, we're using this new TMS because that's what I want. And then everybody will just follow through. But then the users, they may not be as excited to do something different or shift gears. And then even more so for these mom and pop shop, these owner operators, when they're sitting on their phone, how do you make it valuable enough for them to where they're willing to onboard and use the software? That's an interesting challenge we're kind of facing right now. I don't know if you guys had seen the same thing with these small carriers, where it seems like they don't need as much, but on the other hand, they need a lot more automation.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I couldn't concur more. I think there's a little bit of a shift that's happening even with the small carriers over the last few years, where they're starting to become a little bit more open to technology and they're looking at systems. One of the things I noticed as we reached out, like initially, anything 10 trucks or under would not be really looking too much at any sort of system. What I'm observing now is that some of these, 92% or 91% of trucking companies are 1 to 6 trucks, but that in that range, there are people that we started going out as we're doing our research that are actually becoming more interested in some sort of a technology solution to help manage them and their needs. And they need a very limited tech that does bring them quite a bit of value. And it just, I think as to your point, the way they need it, it has to be really easy to consume, super user-friendly, super low touch. And I think you nailed it. That's one thing I also observed as well. So how do you produce something? And if you can actually solve that problem and get a lot of these guys on, that's a huge advantage. Because if somehow using the system, you're able to illuminate that capacity and know where the trucks are, imagine how much value you're bringing to the industry.
Exactly.
That's huge.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to try and quantify that. Like you mentioned the empty miles, you mentioned the missed opportunities that the smaller carriers run into because they're not working with a big shipper. They're not necessarily a favorite of a broker, but they have a truck nevertheless. And so I wonder if we could quantify at some point and say, if we do have this technology, we can reduce empty miles by this amount overall across the board. And then we could talk about some serious metrics, our carbon footprint and things like that. And I think that will get people interested in this stuff even more.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think carbon footprint's becoming pretty big with, on the shipper side, you see it all the time, right? The mandates with companies to try to show how, any sort of system that gives you the ability to not only measure and show the carbon footprint, but give them any actionable intelligence on where they can make changes. Huge.
I talked to the VP of sustainability at Covenant, it's like almost a year ago, but essentially like all the publicly traded companies like Walmart, Target, anyone else that ships a lot of freight, they're all looking at that. And Covenant, which is a trucking company and out of Chattanooga and a brokerage as well, they've done a really good job of studying the data, getting carriers that are more green. And because of that, they have a lot more business opportunities for shippers because they're one of the few people that actually offer specific data to showing the carbon footprint. And I actually wrote an article about how if a broker just wanted to focus on being green or somehow capturing that data and presenting it to a shipper, they could land a lot more business, because right now no one's really doing that. And whoever could help with that would be huge.
Yeah, there's actually a company that some of my former coworkers from Jet started called Sustain.life. And it's kind of like a tracking software that helps companies track their carbon footprint. And it gives them like a score and everything. And we actually thought about maybe partnering with them in some way so that they can start to quantify the impact that something like Alvys could have, or other kind of software. So it seems like, yeah, I mean, the Sustain.life, your path to net zero. I mean, they're just like a tracking technology, but if they can if they can quantify the impact, I think that will help drive adoption.
Totally.
Yeah, at Zuum, so on the shipper side, we do have carbon emissions tools that we built that we provide to shippers. And we're adding, I guess, a little bit more structure around this. At the end of the day, like you said, if we have ways to do the freight matching and provide that ability to have all that, which this is all built, by the way, that we're giving them the ability to match freight and be able to get their backhauls in. So essentially that plus the tool that reports the carbon emissions, plus some of the tools we have that reduce service fails and, you know, all this other stuff that does still contribute. If you look at like the carbon emissions, some of it's empty backhauls or empty miles. Some of it's, not using the trucks to the full capacity. Some of it's how the truck's actually being utilized. Are the routes optimized? Is that driver running the truck correctly, right? Is he braking too much or is he going too fast? All that impacts consumption and carbon emission. As I touched on, like service fails, how do we reduce service fails? Because service fails means more trucks have to move to make some of these fix these screw ups, right? Or I don't know, a truck may flip or it arrives and it's damaged 50% of the load, or whatever. So there's all these little things that do impact, and that's why trucks contribute so much to carbon emissions.
Mm-hmm.
And it just putting the right systems in place, putting the right, not only just the software piece of it, but within the companies really looking at it correctly and building the right mandates within the organization to address it once and for all. I think it's more looked at. I think it's looked at more appropriately in Europe than in America, because there is, a lot more regulation there on. I don't want to say it's appropriate. I'm saying there's more attention on it.
Yeah.
At least there versus here.
Sure. California is kind of following the lead of the EU when it comes to that, but definitely causes like problems. And just like, I think the EU has a mandate that like by 2030, you can't sell vehicles that aren't electric. So, I mean, I think that's gonna be a little bit difficult, especially in this environment right now that we see ourselves in Europe with energy prices skyrocketing.
Yeah, I mean, they haven't figured out the issue with the energy grid, right? I mean, we're all electric, but then they're also saying you can't charge your car because you don't want to strain the grid. So what's the solution?
Totally.
I just don't see 2030. There's no way. I don't know what you guys think. But
I don't think so. My
So-
girlfriend thinks it's possible, but I told her I don't think so. But it is what it is. I'm gonna wrap it up here, guys. I need to get going, but that was a great conversation, Matt. Thank you, Matt and Leo, for your time. And I'll definitely get this. I'll get this sent out to you, to your team, just to make sure that I didn't say anything or ask anything that wasn't supposed to be asked, because I know marketing teams tend to double check that kind of stuff. At least I get
Yeah.
emails and all that.
That's probably
information.
why they wanted to be on. The
Sure.
I'm sure we'll
I get it.
figure it out. But yeah, thank you guys. Thank you both. Really enjoyed the conversation, and looking forward to seeing what, once it's ready, looking at it, and hopefully more conversations between us.
Totally. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Likewise. I really appreciate this, and we should do these more often. That's what I always say.
Yeah. Learn a lot.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Take care.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Appreciate it. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for tuning in to the Daily Freight Caviar podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, or if you didn't, leave a review. Let me know what you think. I appreciate any feedback. If you'd like to have more Freight Caviar content, go to freightcaviar.com and subscribe to my email newsletter.